gold chain is so elegant. There's something going on here now. I'll fix it. It's so elegant though, you know? Yeah, it fits.
It is.
Oh, okay. Well, my man said it's a go, so it's a go.
Her man.
Mrs. never took Ozempic. 4 times undisputed. Mrs. 2-time Olympic. Mrs. different text.
When Claressa Shields finds out Papoose clowned her looks.
You seen the picture that he posted?
An old picture.
Yeah, it was an old picture. She got plenty of beautiful pictures when she's prepared for it, not when she's coming out of the ring.
Run for your life, get some help. I make my own money. I'm successful. I mind my fucking business. And y'all steady come bothering me, but I'm the one that got... No. I got I beat your ass syndrome. I whoop a bitch. I whoop a nigga. I love my man syndrome. Because it's whatever Papoose says goes. Yeah, right? I have that syndrome. I don't fucking... How can I have a... This... When you say ugly girl syndrome, know that that's somebody who's... Somebody who's constantly attacking people. Somebody who is making up things about people. Somebody who's not bothering them. They come go and bother them. That is what ugly girl syndrome is. Also, ugly girl syndrome is calling a girl that's pretty ugly. So a lot of y'all have that. Because I know damn well that I'm not ugly, but the amount of times that I see it, y'all keep saying it to me because y'all want me to believe it. And it's like, I already know. Before they created, or before I knew about some motherfucking weave and hair and wigs and makeup and lipstick and eyelashes and eyebrows, I already had accepted who I was. I already had accepted my beautiful, natural face already. So when it comes to y'all talking about some, oh, she's ugly, baby, I'm never going to believe that, because I've never thought that I was an ugly girl. When I made it past the age of 14, I saw my face, I saw my body shape, I saw my everything, and I was like, God damn, I'm a good looking woman. So you might as well stop saying that to me. You cannot convince a bad bitch that she's not a bad bitch. And then on me, everything is natural, ain't nothing bought. So when y'all come bothering me, it's like, oh, Claressa got ugly girl syndrome. No. If a girl come disrespect a man, I'm going to disrespect them back. I have don't fuck with me syndrome. Leave me alone syndrome. Let me live in love and peace syndrome. Buy what I want syndrome. The fuck? I got that I'm in a league of my own syndrome. That's the syndrome that I have. Y'all blow me. Y'all got to stop. People who I do know or don't know, I'm not finna go on nobody's page and say, oh, you're ugly. Oh, you can't dress. I don't like your hair. What? So what? You don't like my hair. So what? If you don't like my clothes, so what? Do you pay my bills? You don't. So I don't understand that. That's why it's like kind of mind-boggling to me, but it's like, bro, I have make your own way syndrome. Get to the top by any means necessary syndrome. Make your money syndrome. Man, please take care of your family syndrome. That's what I got. I got don't bother me unless you want me to bother you syndrome. I got the when you start with me, I finish with you syndrome. That's what I got. You go low, I go to hell syndrome.
Something strange is happening online right now, and a lot of people are starting to notice the same pattern at the same time. It's not just drama anymore. It's not just internet beef. It's turning into something that feels like a slow-motion collapse of public perception. And at the center of it all is Claressa Shields, someone who, depending on who you ask, is either being unfairly targeted or is repeatedly creating situations that keep escalating beyond control. But here's the part that has people uneasy. Every time there's an opportunity to calm things down, it seems like the situation gets louder instead. And now people are asking a very uncomfortable question. Is this just controversy, or is this the beginning of a real downfall? Because the internet has started paying attention in a different way now. Not entertained attention, not gossip attention, but watchful attention. Like everyone is waiting to see what happens next. At first, this all looked like standard social media conflict. back-and-forth commentary, disagreements, and public personalities clashing in spaces where emotions run high. But over time, the narrative started shifting. What people are pointing out now is not just isolated incidents, but what they believe is a repeating pattern of behavior: confrontation, escalation, denial of wrongdoing, and then further backlash. And the key word that keeps coming up in online discussions is accountability, or in the eyes of critics, the lack of it. Because instead of situations cooling down after being addressed, they seem to intensify each time they reappear in conversation. And that is what has created the current wave of attention. Not one moment, but a sequence of moments stacking on top of each other.
Okay, now we have the man of the hour, my man Papoose. Baby, rate the food 1 through 10.
Listen, man, this food is amazing. The way you seasoned it,
Okay.
it was cooked perfectly.
Period.
Thank you, man. I need another plate.
You okay?
Yeah, great job.
But what 1 through 10?
I already told you it's an 11.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Supporters and critics both agree on one thing: this situation didn't start overnight. According to ongoing online discussions, there have been multiple controversies involving Claressa Shields over time, ranging from public disputes, interviews that sparked backlash, and personal conflicts that spilled into social media. What critics are focusing on, however, is not just what happened in each individual case, but how each situation was handled afterward. They argue that instead of de-escalation, things often become more intense. Instead of reflection, there is often rebuttal. Instead of silence, there is more response. And in internet culture, that cycle can be dangerous because it keeps attention locked in. Every response becomes another headline, every clarification becomes another debate, and every debate becomes another wave of commentary. So even if the original issue was small, the reaction can make it grow far beyond its starting point. That's what people mean when they say it keeps getting worse. One of the moments that keeps resurfacing in discussions is an incident involving Alicia, which many online users reference when talking about escalating tensions. Different versions of the situation circulate online, and depending on who is speaking, the framing changes significantly.
She can get away with murder. She pulling up to people's houses or whatever. But my thing is this. What happened the other day, from what I saw, it looked like Bigfoot got pulled up on. Not like she pulled up on somebody, she got pulled up on. That's what it looked like to me. I was not there. I'm going off the videos that I seen. So, with that being said, why you pulled up on her? I'm not pulling up on Charlita. I'm not. If I see her out somewhere and I catch her.
Some describe it as a heated confrontation that went too far emotionally. Others emphasize physical escalation being involved. Others focus on what happened afterward, online statements, reactions, and responses that followed the incident. But regardless of perspective, what matters most in the public conversation is how it was handled afterward. Critics argue that instead of a clear apology or de-escalation, the situation continued to develop through commentary and counter-commentary online. And that's where the divide begins, because supporters say the narrative is being exaggerated, while critics say the behavior is being repeated. And when two groups interpret the same situation in completely opposite ways, tension doesn't disappear, it expands. One thing people underestimate in situations like this is how social media removes the ability to truly reset a narrative. In real life, conflicts can cool down privately, but online, everything is permanent. Every clip, every quote, every reaction, every repost. And once a public figure becomes attached to a pattern in the public mind, it becomes harder to separate moments from identity. So now, instead of isolated incidents, people start building a storyline, and that storyline becomes self-reinforcing. Even neutral actions get interpreted through the lens of previous controversies. That's why people are saying this feels like a fall coming, not because of one event, but because perception is stacking, and perception, once locked in, is difficult to reverse. Another layer that keeps coming up in discussions involves public relationships and appearances in media settings. At one point, Claressa Shields and Papoose appeared together in interviews and public platforms, which sparked additional commentary due to the overlap between personal and public narratives involving other well-known figures. Over time, observers noticed fewer joint appearances, which led to speculation online about whether public distancing was happening. Some interpreted this as strategic separation from controversy. Others saw it as normal media scheduling changes. Others tied it to broader narrative shifts online. But the key issue here is perception again, because once the audience starts building a story, every change becomes part of the story, even if there is no confirmed meaning behind it. And in the absence of clarity, the internet fills gaps with assumptions. That's how narratives grow far beyond their original facts. What makes this situation so heavily discussed is not just what is being said about Claressa Shields, but how fast each new wave of discussion escalates. A comment becomes a clip becomes a debate becomes a trend becomes a narrative, and a narrative becomes a label. That cycle is extremely hard to break once it starts, and critics argue that repeated public responses only feed the cycle further instead of slowing it down. Supporters argue she is simply defending herself against misinformation, and once again, both sides believe they are correct, but the result is the same. The conversation doesn't end, it expands. Now, when people online talk about a fall, they are not always referring to money, success, or material status. Instead, they are referring to reputation, public trust, public perception, public patience. Because in the attention economy, attention is not the same as support. You can be constantly talked about and still lose popular favor. You can remain visible and still become controversial. And you can stay relevant while simultaneously becoming polarizing. That's what makes this situation feel so unstable to observers, because it's not about one mistake, it's about how many layers of perception are building on top of each other without resolution. At this point, there are only a few possible directions this narrative can go. It can de-escalate if tensions are addressed in a way that satisfies public curiosity and criticism. It can continue escalating if responses keep feeding the cycle of attention. Or it can plateau into long-term controversy, where the topic never fully disappears, but also never fully resolves. And right now, people online are watching closely to see which direction it takes. Because once a public narrative reaches this level of intensity, even small actions can shift perception significantly. So the real question is not just what happened, but what happens next. Is this just online noise that will eventually fade? Or is this one of those situations where the internet has already decided a storyline and is now waiting for it to play out? Either way, the attention isn't going anywhere right now, and everyone seems to be watching the same thing unfold in real time. What do you think is really happening here? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want more deep dive breakdowns like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned, because this story doesn't feel finished yet.